everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today's video is all about Jane Austen's Persuasion, book versus film. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books. And today's video is a little bit different because I'm going to be comparing a book and two films. July is Jane Austen July on Booktube, and Jane Austen July is hosted by three fabulous hosts: Katie over at Books and Things, Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia at Spinster's Library. So you go and check out their channels in the description down below. Now, I reread Persuasion and I also watched Netflix's new 2022 adaptation of the same. And just for a basis of comparison, I also watched the BBC film, I think it was BBC, from 1995. I also wanted to mention that I reread Persuasion and watched the new film as part of a read-along and watch-along that was hosted by Gemma at Gemma Books and Jack at Spread Bookjoy. The amount I got from that group of people meeting and talking about their experiences reading Persuasion, either for the first time, some people it was their first Jane Austen, some people have read it before, and it was so interesting to hear everyone's perspectives on this book. And just to give you a little bit of context, I would say that Persuasion is probably right up there as one of my favourite Jane Austens. Now that I've reread it, I think I would probably say I like it best, but Emma is close behind. What I'd like to do today is talk about how the films and the book compare to each other. Spoilers are of course possible for all three, but there will especially be spoilers later on for the new Netflix film. There will be massive spoilers for the book in a final section, but I will warn you when we're getting to the very spoilery section. If you don't want any spoilers of any kind about Persuasion, probably come back to this video at a later time. First of all, let's talk about the book. Originally published in 1817 after Austen's death, Persuasion was the last novel that she actually finished. It follows Anne Elliot, a 27-year-old spinster who was once engaged to a Frederick Wentworth, but was persuaded not to go ahead because he had no fortune and not enough status. This persuasion was mainly by family friend Lady Russell, who is Anne's sort of, I hesitate to say confidant, but she is sort of Anne's mother figure after the death of her mother. Anne's a very isolated character within her family. Her father and elder sister are really vain and obsessed with title. Unfortunately, Sir Walter Elliot, her father, has spent all of his money and needs to downsize, which is being affected by a trip to Bath and leasing out the family home, Kellynch Hall. Anne's younger sister Mary is needy and self-centred and has married into the Musgrove family, and we meet the Musgrove family when Anne goes to look after Mary. In this family, Anne is valued much more, but kind of as a resource, so everybody sort of talks to Anne about each other and hopes for Anne to kind of fix their problems. Kellynch Hall is rented out to Admiral Croft and his wife, and when the Crofts arrive at Kellynch Hall, none other than Captain Wentworth, who is the brother of Mrs. Croft, arrives to stay. He's taken to be in the market for marriage and for being fixed up with one of the Musgrove sisters, Louisa and Henrietta. Coming on to very slightly spoilery territory, a large group of the characters I've mentioned go on a trip to Lyme, and this results in an accident that will set in motion the whole chain of events in the ending of the book, and directly leads to the final denouement in Bath between Anne and Captain Wentworth. And the wonderful ending, or just before ending, of Persuasion is one of Austen's finest, especially the romance of the very famous letter. Several adaptations have been made of Persuasion, including the controversial new ones, starring Dakota Johnson as Anne and Cosmo Jarvis as Captain Wentworth. I've also watched the 1995 version for comparison, and that one stars Amanda Root and Kieran Hines in the leading roles. Let's talk about the films. Persuasion was released in July 2022. A lot has already been said about it. And I don't think I need to go into the smaller, finer details, such as why Anne suddenly has a pet rabbit, or why she's talking about her dreams in the middle of awkward social situations. If you would like to see more of sort of a funny reaction to this film, I will link in the description down below several videos that I've really enjoyed and that brought something different to this discussion. So do check out Claudia at Spinster's Library for a brilliant rant review. Full of Lit's reaction is great as well, and really sort of dissects why the film doesn't work. And I enjoyed Marissa at Blatantly Bookish trying really hard to make sense of this film in her video. So I'll link all of those videos down below for you to watch afterwards. But there is just so much to unpack about this film. Thought I would concentrate on the settings and scenery, the characters, which I'll break down into the minor characters and the two main leads, and the final section, which will be incredibly spoiler heavy, is going to be a sort of key moments of the film plot section. And I'm going to be talking about how the book and the film compare, if they do. First of all, setting. My favourite thing about Persuasion 2022 is the scenery. The settings are so well imagined, including Sir Walter Elliot's shrubberies, the seaside at Lyme, and the scenery at Bath as well. It's all very visually pleasing, very stunning backdrops to the story. That was one thing I thought that the adaptation did well. Scenery is one of the things that it's quite hard to mess up. The images of the lovely seaside at Lyme are going to be good anyway. The 1995 film maybe doesn't have as much grandness in some of the locations as this new film attempts to have. But again, it made good use of location, and in both I particularly liked the Lyme scenery. But unfortunately, the scenery is really the thing that I really liked about 2022. It's going to be downhill from there. The characters and or the cast. Let's talk about the supporting roles first. And there's a few key characters in the book, or groups of characters. There's the Elliot family, there's the Musgrove family, there's the Crofts, Admiral and Mrs. Croft. There's Lady Russell, who obviously played a key role in Anne's decision not to marry Captain Wentworth. There's Mrs. Smith, who is an old friend of Anne's who she goes to visit in Bath, and she plays a very pivotal role in the book. We also have Mrs. Clay, who's kind of a hanger-on slash friend to Sir Walter and Elizabeth. We have Mr. William Elliot, who is a cousin of Anne's. We have a couple of other captains who are visited in the story, Captain Harville and Captain Bennet, and both are important. So for me, the casting was okay on both films in the wider key roles. Mrs. Smith is unfortunately removed completely from her role in Bath in the new film. I don't know why this is done, perhaps just to keep the group of characters smaller. I didn't mind so much that she was not included because I felt like maybe they did that on grounds of pace. I'm not sure. She does play a key part in the 1995 film and wasn't really how I imagined her from the book. That's just being quite picky on my part. I should say at this point that I don't really love period dramas, so it wasn't like I was watching this with like some sort of precious image of what 1995's film was like. I actually watched the 95 film after the 2022 film, and there were still things that I didn't like about it because I'm not hugely drawn into period dramas and adaptations. I thought the Elliots, the family in general, were well cast and portrayed, and they were portrayed, even in the 2022, they were portrayed quite similarly to the book, and there's a lot of humour and comedy in Jane Austen around families. And around this family, there is a lot of humour in this book. This Sir Walter in 2022 is super over-the-top vain and played quite well by Richard E. Grant. And Mia McKenna Bruce played Mary, and I thought she did a really good job of sort of Mary's like hypochondriac, self-centered character traits. In the 1995 cast, again, I don't have a huge amount to say. The 1995 film is pretty closely faithful to the book. So all of the characters are pretty faithful. My only complaints in the 1995 version is I thought that Sophie Thompson looked a bit old to play Amanda Root's younger sister, but she did a good job anyway as Mary. I did find it very, very strange that they'd sort of added into that version like an obsession with eating for Elizabeth, the older sister. She was very slouched all the time and she was constantly eating in every scene, and I thought that this was quite inappropriate to the character, who I would say takes herself quite seriously and is probably quite an upright character. Minor points, minor points. I thought the Crofts and Lady Russell were both underused in the 2022 version. Casting was fine, but the actors were not given much to do. One of the things I found particularly terrible, unfortunately, in this adaptation, and cringeworthy in the extreme, were the conversations between Lady Russell and Anne. They sort of treated Lady Russell as though she was both a confidant and girlfriend, gal pal type person to Anne, which is not at all what she actually is in the book. She overshared massively about things that would definitely not be overshared about in Regency times, and I just found that the dialogue she'd been given was incredibly cringeworthy, so I kind of felt sorry for the actress there, who was just not really put to use. I thought the Musgroves, particularly Louisa and Henrietta, were also well cast and good fun in the new version. And Captains Harville and Benwick were fine, well matched to the book again. Mr. Elliot in the film is much more direct in 2022, sort of immediately tells Anne his plans, which really sort of defeated his role in the book. The main characters in the 2022 version is definitely where it goes horribly wrong. So Captain Wentworth was okay, but the complete change in character of Anne made their relationship not work, and there was no chemistry. I liked that we were given a little bit of backstory, a little bit of showing them being in love in the past, which the book kind of only does after the fact, and Anne sort of looks back on it in a very sort of vague way. But they just didn't work together, which is mainly the fault of Anne and her complete change of character. This for me is the crux of why the 2022 film didn't work, and what they got so badly wrong was Anne Elliot. Anne is a favourite Austen heroine for a reason. She's quiet and dignified, and she accepts that her past mistakes may mean that she will never find love again. One of the hardest things to adapt in this book is her. I slightly give the benefit of the doubt to the film, because although Persuasion is not a first-person narrative, we do get to hear all of Anne's sort of inner turmoil while she is outwardly a very well presented and like very correct character who would not sort of flout the social norms, and is sort of very now strong in her convictions that she won't just sort of settle for marrying somebody she doesn't want to. Through Austen's writing, we get to hear Anne's thoughts on her family's behaviour, and she has a quiet, sensible charm. She's an introverted character who keeps all of her thoughts and hopes to herself. This makes it very, very hard, obviously, for filmmakers to get her right, to create this character. And I thought 1995 did a good job of Quiet Anne. It veers towards being a bit more boring for me, because she can't really tell us her thoughts, apart from through Amanda Root's performance, which is very good. The actors in this, particularly Amanda Root and Kieran Hines, really get a lot across in their facial expressions, in the looks that they give each other. And she does get across quite a bit of the anguish without ever saying a word. But this version still requires her to talk to Lady Russell a couple of times to make things a bit plainer for the audience. Without Anne's sort of inner workings, it is difficult to translate this book to the screen. 2022 just rips up Book Anne and gives us a brash, clumsy, wine-drinking, sad girl crying face down on her bed and talking directly to the audience. She is basically everything that Anne is not. I don't think any of this so far that I've talked about is Dakota Johnson's fault. but she also doesn't give a nuanced performance, and she is wrong for the role in both looks, demeanour and voice. I can understand making changes to a book is necessary and sometimes works. My favourite adaptation, for example, of all time is 2019's Little Women, which I believe makes changes for the better. And it's probably the only film that I think sort of retains the essence of the book, but actually builds on it, gives it that little bit extra, and even for me, slightly elevates what you get in the book in my eyes. What 2022 Persuasion did was spend its entire 1 hour and 47-minute runtime on what felt like a character assassination of Anne Elliot. It felt like watching a train crash you couldn't look away from, as each scene found a new way to make Anne Elliot look like some sort of Bridget Jones-esque idiotic alcoholic mess. From the opening, where within minutes she's laying face down on her bed crying, to the moment where she shouts at Wentworth out of a window but then ducks and hides and ends up spilling gravy all down herself, to my absolute worst moment of the whole film, where I nearly had to turn off because it was just so un-Anne Elliot, so un-Jane Austen, so un-Regency, and so unnecessary, was the moment where Anne decides to go to the toilet behind a tree so that she can overhear some people. She couldn't just be passing by or like just sitting next to where they happen to be like she is in all the other versions. No, she had to go as though she was going to do a wee. Just everything about this Anne feels so inappropriate, and even comparing her to Bridget Jones feels harsh to Bridget Jones. I would say Dakota Johnson spends 80-ish% of this film either drinking wine out of the bottle or sneaking off to try and drink wine out of the bottle, or just sort of staring in a sort of sad girl way at nothing, just looking into the distance. I'm not even sure what the look is. Is it sad? Is it wistful? Is it just blank? And the rest of it is just like a nightmare of making Anne Elliot do and say things that she would never do and say. You can't just take Anne Elliot, no matter how loosely you are basing something on Persuasion. If you want to base something on Persuasion, you've obviously chosen it for a reason, because people love it, because people love Jane Austen perhaps, but presumably the thing that most people like about Persuasion is the character of Anne Elliot, because it is Anne Elliot's story. If you're going to fundamentally just destroy everything about that character, why make it an adaptation of Persuasion? Why not make a different film? I don't get it. I almost feel like Anne Elliot is the only element that you really need to retain to make a good adaptation of Persuasion. Now, I'm not saying I'm a filmmaker, I'm not saying I know how I would do it, but I do feel like you need to respect Anne Elliot to get a good adaptation of Persuasion done. But let's talk plot. So, I have two ultimate favourite moments of Persuasion in terms of the book. And when watching both of the films, I was just hoping that A, both of these moments were included, and that B, they would tell me how right the film had got things. So, putting aside Anne Elliot being completely and utterly wrong, did this film, or did the 1995 film, get these two pivotal moments right for me? In this section, warning, there is definite spoilers for the book. I've tried to keep it pretty much spoiler free so far for the book, but this section will talk in detail about two major incidents in the book, one of which happens at the end of volume 1 and one of which happens at the almost end of volume 2. So if you have not read those two parts of Persuasion and you intend to, and you don't want spoilers, probably don't watch this bit, maybe skip. I will include where to skip to in the description down below. This is your last spoiler warning. The spoilers are coming imminently. Okay, so the two key scenes that I want to explore are Louisa Musgrove's accident at Lyme and Wentworth's letter. These are my two ultimate favourite moments of Persuasion, and whether or not I like Emma better than Persuasion, which I don't at the moment, they are also my ultimate two favourite moments of Jane Austen, full stop. They are so good. Let's look at Lyme first. On my first read of Persuasion, I'll admit that I really wasn't that into the book until the trip to Lyme, and that changed everything for me. And on my second read, rereading it this month with the Persuasion Along group, I felt no differently. I still absolutely love this scene, and talking in the group helped me to realise why and how this moment is pivotal to the whole plot, but how it's also really pivotal to what we feel and what we see about these characters and what their character is made of, basically. But the first time reading it, it was only my second ever Austen. I hadn't read Austen for a good 10 years, and this was the moment that the book started to get really good for me. So here come the spoilers. So a large group of the characters go off on a trip for about 3 days or something to Lyme Regis, and the group includes Wentworth and Anne, Charles, Louisa and Henrietta Musgrove, who are all Anne's in-laws, her brother and sisters-in-law, and Charles is married to Anne's sister Mary, and Mary goes too. So that group visits two captains who live in Lyme, Captain Harville and his wife Mrs. Harville, and Captain Bennet, who was engaged to Harville's sister Fanny, and she has died while he was away at sea, so he is in mourning. So this is the first time we encounter those three. Those three are not super important to that incident, except to say that Captain Bennet is with them on the trip in question. So on their final day in Lyme, Bennet is walking with Anne and the group. They go to a place called the Cobb, or they're walking along a place called the Cobb, which is like a sort of a sea wall, I picture it as, and the films show it as. So I'm going to read you a little excerpt from chapter 12 of volume 1. There was too much wind to make the high part of the new Cobb pleasant for the ladies, and they agreed to get down the steps to the lower, and all were contented to pass quietly and carefully down the steep flight, excepting Louisa. She must be jumped down them by Captain Wentworth. In all their walks, he had to jump her from the stiles. The sensation was delightful to her. The hardness of the pavement for her feet made him less willing upon the present occasion. He did it, however. She was safely down, and instantly, to show her enjoyment, ran up the steps to be jumped down again. He advised her against it. Thought the jar was too great, but no. He reasoned and talked in vain. She smiled and said, "I am determined I will." He put out his hands. She was too precipitate by half a second. She fell on the pavement on the lower Cobb, and was taken up lifeless. There was no wound, no blood, no visible bruise, but her eyes were closed. She breathed not. Her face was like death. The horror of the moment to all who stood around. Captain Wentworth, who had caught her up, knelt with her in his arms, looking at her with a face as pallid as her own, in an agony of silence. "She is dead! She is dead!" screamed Mary, catching hold of her husband, and contributing with his own horror to make him immovable. And in another moment Henrietta, sinking under the conviction, lost her senses too, and would have fallen on the steps but for Captain Bennet and Anne, who caught and supported her between them. "Is there no one to help me?" were the first words which burst from Captain Wentworth in a tone of despair, and as if all of his own strength were gone. Go to him," cried Anne. "For heaven's sake, go to him. I can support her myself. Leave me and go to him. Rub her hands. Rub her temples. Here are salts. Take them, take them." Captain Bennet obeyed, and Charles at the same moment disengaging himself from his wife. They were both with him, and Louisa was raised up and supported more firmly between them, and everything was done that Anne had prompted, but in vain, while Captain Wentworth, staggering against the wall for his support, exclaimed in the bitterest agony, "Oh God, her father and mother!" "A surgeon," said Anne. He caught the word. It seemed to rouse him at once, and saying only, "True, true, a surgeon this instant," was darting away when Anne eagerly suggested, "Captain Benwick, would it not be better for Captain Benwick? He knows where a surgeon is to be found." What I love so much about that scene is that the aftermath perfectly demonstrates the different characters and brings Anne and Wentworth together through the way they manage the situation. When this is portrayed on film, I want to see the sisters, so Mary, Anne's sister, and Henrietta, Louisa's sister, fall apart utterly and have to be looked after. I want anguish from Charles and even Wentworth. I want them to show us that they think Louisa is dead. So how did 1995 Persuasion do first? There isn't enough reaction from the sisters at all. I don't really feel the panic. Plus they did a weird slow-mo of the jump. So they did okay, but it could have been better. But they do keep the line, "I am determined," which I liked about it. So what does Netflix do with it? There's hardly any reaction from the sisters, and even Mary just stands there like, I don't think there was any action from Mary whatsoever, when she should be absolutely hysterical. In both of the versions, Anne runs straight away to Louisa and is able to help Louisa. We don't get any sense that Captain Wentworth is isolated in his trying to revive Louisa, because Anne is sort of taken up with the two sisters who are kind of insensible. In the scene that follows, in the 2022 version, Captain Wentworth describes Anne as capable and perfect, and that she must be the one to stay with Louisa, which is the same across all versions. But in this version, is it actually believable that Anne is capable and perfect? She hasn't really done anything. She's told somebody to go and fetch a doctor, and that is literally all Dakota Johnson's Anne does. My feelings about both versions are not great, but I do appreciate that both versions keep the incident in, and they are pretty similar renderings of that incident. Let's move on and look at my second scene that I wanted to examine, Wentworth's letter. If you've read Persuasion, you probably love the letter scene. I think pretty much everybody does, and I think it's probably the most romantic moment in Austen. 1995 does this scene more accurately, and the 2022 version at least bore some vague resemblance. So the scene involves Anne talking to Captain Harville this time about women loving the longest, and he disagrees with her and thinks that men are more constant and faithful and love for the longest. And listening into this conversation is Captain Wentworth, who is writing a letter at a writing desk in the same room. When I read this both times, I absolutely loved this scene and how it works. And I think Austen just perfectly captured a moment, and I wanted to see that moment captured on film. So in 2022, Anne reads the letter herself directly to the camera. I haven't mentioned it yet, but it's a recurring theme in this version of Persuasion that Anne talks to the camera. So she reads the letter directly to the camera with intercut shots of the writing, the letter that she is actually looking at. Anne then runs out to find Wentworth. On her way, she discovers Mr. Elliot and Mrs. Clay kissing, which is a bit of a weird twist, and also completely interrupts the romantic moment with a sort of dramatic comedy type moment. And as she runs further on from that meeting, we then hear Wentworth's voice reading the rest of the letter. She catches up to him, and of course they kiss, and a modern song kicks in to see out sort of the end of the film. I did actually think, and feel free to disagree with me, that this scene could actually have worked if they had characterised the characters properly and there had actually been any chemistry between the two leads. Unfortunately there wasn't, so that wasn't the case. In 1995 we get another version of this scene. When Anne finds the letter and reads it, we first of all get Kieran Hines' voice as Captain Wentworth speaking the words of the letter, and I think this is a really nice way of doing it while Anne reads the letter. And it could have worked perfectly for me, but partway through they put in Amanda Root's voice also reading the letter, which is fine, but at times they sort of ran the two soundtracks of both of their voices together, and at those points I couldn't always make out the words properly, so that didn't work for me. I wouldn't have minded if they'd sort of taken it in turns to do the voiceover, but mingling them, I can see what they were trying to do, but it wasn't quite right for me. But Anne's reaction was precise to the book. Her saying that she needed to go home, Charles Musgrove's mother insisting that he accompany her home, and they meet Wentworth on the way and Charles leaves her with Wentworth. I thought they did a pretty good job of this too, apart from the kiss was very strangely slow in coming, and there was a weird carnival going on the streets of Bath in the background and afterwards, which it was fine. I'm being very, very picky now. In the book, we actually don't explicitly get a kiss. Austen doesn't really write these dramatic kiss moments that you need at the end of a film. I really actually enjoy the subtlety of the book more, but I do see why they go for the kiss in the films. So that was my take on Persuasion 2022, how it compares to a pretty faithful adaptation from 1995 and how it compares to the book itself. In conclusion, I'm sure that lots of people will watch and enjoy Netflix's Persuasion. I would be surprised if those enjoying it are particular Jane Austen fans, or certainly fans of the book Persuasion or the character Anne Elliot. If you enjoy films where you are treated to a cringe a minute, I would highly recommend hate watching this to see what all the fuss is about. If you are Anne Elliot's biggest fan and you don't want to see a version of Persuasion with a whole new Anne Elliot in it, probably best avoided. That's all from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Persuasion, book versus film. If you have enjoyed this video today, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you watched 2022 Persuasion? If not, will you consider watching it? And have you read the book Persuasion? Talk to me about all the differences I might have missed in this comparison, and I'd love to hear from you as always. I very much hope to see you all again soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.